Right now on Amplified, a senior engineer who's leading the way in some of Ireland's biggest infrastructure projects.
We've gone through a decade of what I would call planning and designing. The next decade is going to be about delivery. So I can't think of a more exciting time to be coming into the engineering profession.
Hi there, my name is Dusty Rhodes and welcome to Amplified, the Engineers Journal podcast. As our population grows and our world gets busier, there is significant pressure put on our infrastructure. Today, we're meeting an engineer who's leading a team of over 400 people working on infrastructure to develop a sustainable future. We're going to hear about his projects in public transport and gas lines, along with how he's transitioned from civil engineer to management with Arup in Galway. I'm delighted to welcome Director of Arup, Donal McDaid. Donal, how are you?
I'm very good, Dusty. I'm not from Galway. I'm based in Dublin, but I'm in our Galway office today.
Very here. Good. So the company is kind of based between the two cities, yeah?
Well, on the island of Ireland, we've offices in Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Galway, and Belfast.
And are you originally from Galway yourself, are you?
No, I'm from Donegal. I've lost the accent, but I went to college. I went to college in Galway, and I can chat to you about that. But so I've a huge affinity for Galway, and I've done quite a lot of work in Galway.
Tell me, speaking of college, what attracted you to engineering in the first place? Can you remember that first little spark where you went, that looks interesting?
So I grew up in rural South Donegal, and I went to school in the Arup Vocational School in Donegal town. And Dusty, I was probably quite good at maths and physics and subjects like that. I was probably particularly good at technical drawing, as I remember it. So I was either going to be an architect or an engineer. But the other thing I really wanted to do was go to Galway. So they didn't do architecture in Galway. So I'll be perfectly honest with my engineering colleagues on the podcast here. The fact that they only did engineering in Galway is the reason I'm an engineer.
Right. So you kind of like fell into it just out of a practical reason. Have you fallen in love with engineering since?
Well, yeah, I'm nearly 30 years at it, so I most definitely have fallen in love with it. I mean, the degree in Galway was a super degree. An engineering degree is tough. Well, if you go to all the lectures, it's extremely tough just in terms of long days. But it's hard to think of a more flexible degree that prepares you for life as well as a career in engineering. And bearing in mind, I finished my degree in 1983, and the world was a very different place here in Ireland. There actually was no work, right? Apart from half of my class going to London to work on the sites, there was literally no work in Ireland at that time. So I ended up then doing a master's in civil engineering in Trinity before again realising there was no work, and I ended up going to England as well.
Well, give us a brief idea then of your career progression. You went off to the UK. How did you end up back here?
I went off to the UK in end of 94, and I spent 2 years working in a small environmental engineering consultancy in the south of England in Kent, a nice part of the world to live for 2 years. I probably came back to Ireland because I met my now wife back then, and I was afforded an opportunity to interview with Arup. So when I was growing up and in college, Arup would have been the preeminent engineering firm in Ireland, in my view, but they would have had a specialism in structural engineering in particular. So I joined at a time when civil engineering was the shiny new thing, believe it or not, within Arup, and we've come a long way since then.
Now, you stayed with Arup for, as you say, nearly 30 years. I'm interested in this because a lot of people now get into a firm and they stay 2 or 3 years and then they're gone because they want to move up the ladder, and it's easier to do it by jumping to another company and usually for better money. On the flip side of that, you've been with 30 years with Arup. How would you say it is staying with the same company?
You're right on what you say. I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about this in my role now, and engineers want experiences, and if you can get a company that offers experiences to engineers as well as a career, that's a USP in my view. So I don't know how much you know about Arup, but we are actually effectively an employee-owned company globally. So we have an independence that allows us to set our own direction. So we don't have to pay dividends to shareholders externally. It's entirely about us. And I'd like to say we are very much a purpose-driven firm. Our mission has always been to shape a better world, and we have a global strategy now which is entirely focused on a sustainable future. So everything we do must advance a sustainable future. That's exciting because it actually attracts an awful lot of young people into the firm now who have a burning platform to actually do something about the existential crisis of our time, climate change.
Can I move on and ask you, Donal, about the kind of stuff that you've done in your career, kind of looking back? Do you have an example of a project that you're particularly proud of?
Well, given what I just said, one of my most favorite projects, in fact, maybe the project I'm most proud of, is actually a gas pipeline project, believe it or not. It was in my very early days in Arup, and the reason it has a long-lasting memory with me is the level of responsibility I was given at such an early stage on that project.
How old were you?
Oh, I would have been a young engineer, Dusty. I would have been 25, 26, maybe.
Wow.
And for the most part, I was project manager for that project. At the time, it was the largest ever gas pipeline in terms of size. It was a 70 bar, just under a meter diameter gas transmission pipeline. That at the time, there was an urgency in terms of it being delivered to actually secure Ireland's energy supply and electricity generation in the Greater Dublin area. So it was an incredibly complex project because it was routed through urban Dublin. So when I look back, we went under 4 rivers, including the River Liffey and Strawberry Beds, under the 2 canals, under 4 motorways, and intricately routing that pipeline through many, many developments. So the reason it left a lasting impression on me wasn't just about the technical detail of the project. It was, by the end of it, I got to know every single local authority engineer. I got to know every single architect. I got to know every single planner, every single developer. So the project afforded me the opportunity to build a network that I still have that network in place from that project. And maybe to bookend it to Engineers Ireland, it was on the basis of that project that I was shortlisted for Chartered Engineer of the Year. I think it was 2004. I didn't win, somebody else won, but I've had the privilege over recent years to actually give the award to the Young Chartered Engineer of the Year every year as part of the Arup Trust. So it's always held in fond memory for me.
Tell me about the project and dealing with all of the local authorities and people, because you're 25 years of age, and when you're 25, the great thing is you know everything and you're right about everything. And then you come up against other people who've got other opinions and stuff. What did you learn about yourself, and what did you learn about dealing with people on that project?
I guess the biggest thing I learned is that at the end of the day, we're a people business. Right. So you actually need to be able to engage with people, with stakeholders. You need to be able to bring people on a journey with you, So this is a project of national significance. And that was recognized. So people were willing to work with you. It wasn't just the local authorities. I remember going to developers and talking to them about the fact that we have to route this pipeline through a housing development you're actually in the middle of trying to get planning for or get off the ground. So it took a lot of delicate negotiating skills and effectively being a bit of a diplomat, Dusty, from my memory.
Tell me about the more technical side of it, because you said you had to go through under housing estates and major roads and rivers. And how does that all work, trying to get that gas underneath those land objects?
A huge amount of the technical difficulty ended up being in geology, because we some of the crossings, particularly when you think of the Liffey, and I think in particular as well, God, it's gone back, Dusty, it's 20, 25 years ago. I'm thinking the Royal Canal in particular was particularly deep at the point we crossed. And I probably have some old photographs of how deep the actual launch pit was for the directional drill under the Royal Canal. So even before you actually started the drilling under the canal, to get down deep enough was a challenge in itself.
And has the technology changed much since then to now?
I wouldn't think so. It's not an area I do very much work in myself personally now. So I wouldn't have thought it has changed significantly. Interestingly, after COP26, Arup made a global commitment not to do any more work in fossil fuel extraction or transmission or distribution aligned to our sustainable strategy. And that wasn't for any reason by means of not understanding the need for continued use of fossil fuels as part of a transition phase. But we have a limited resource globally, so we focus our entire effort on renewables now. And that led to really interesting conversations with Gas Networks Ireland, who are a huge client of ours in terms of what we could and couldn't do for them going forward. And they're great conversations that we've been able to have, because right now we are still working with Gas Networks Ireland, and we're helping them think about the future, which is hydrogen and biomethane. So I was delighted to be able to go along to Gas Networks Ireland's launch of their net zero strategy 2045 a couple of weeks ago, where by 2045 they have a really ambitious, and it's great to see a really ambitious plan to be fully ready for hydrogen and biomethane as opposed to natural gas.
Well, listen, bringing us up to the present day as we're talking about, I wanted to ask you as well about the Bus Connect system, which you're kind of looking at from a more senior position. How has that been different from the gas project?
I'd say, Dusty, most of my professional work at a project level has actually been in transport planning and as a project manager, project director for major transport infrastructure projects. So I've had a long history of work in the quality bus network in Dublin over the years, and I've been part of a team with industry partners that have not only been looking at the planning and design of Bus Connects, but also bringing the projects through the statutory planning process. So when you think about cities in Ireland like Dublin, they're low density cities at the end of the day still. So the workhorse is always going to be the bus. And the Bus Connects program, which again is an ambitious program by the National Transport Authority, I think is going to be transformative, because it's not just about the bus network. There's been a huge focus on walking and cycling and placemaking along those corridors as well. And maybe because I'm in the Galway office today, a project that's been very close to my heart, I was heavily involved and I led the development of the Galway Transport Strategy. One of the projects in that strategy, which is part of the Bus Connects program here in Galway, which is a project I've led, is the Cross City Link project, which the Bord Pleanála finally get permission to last week. And again, Dusty, that's going to be a project that I really believe is going to be transformative for Galway, because maybe not everybody in Galway realises what it's going to do, but it's going to take traffic out of the core city centre area in Galway. It'll be to take traffic out of our square. It'll create this corridor through the core city centre area for buses. But for me, it was always about letting the city breathe, because when you afford the opportunity that taking traffic out of the core city centre does, there's a huge component of that project which is really about new urban spaces and actually connecting those urban spaces in a necklace across the city, east to west. So a project I'm very proud of here in Galway.
Is there a little bit of that project that includes an idea that you had where you went, well, I think it'd be good that if we did boom, 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 and it's there still in the plan?
It's funny you ask me that, because I'm not going to take all of the claim to fame for it, but I do remember where the idea of the Cross City Link came from, and it came from a doodle I had on a napkin in a meeting with Galway City Council about 7 or 8 years ago, when I drew this doodle of a concept sketch for what the Cross City Link might be. So I'm going to take a little bit of fame for that. I've lost the napkin, not quite sure where it went. If somebody in Galway has it, please send it back to me for posterity.
There's many great ideas started off on a napkin. But listen, you were talking about, kind of planning and regulation there. How was that particular project impacted by planning and regulation? I mean, is it getting harder and harder with the planning and regulation compared to when you were kicking off in the 80s, or is it kind of the same amount of muck that you have to get through? Because it's a huge issue for engineering.
Planning, there's no state secret here when I say planning has been a real challenge for us in Ireland over the last decade. It really has. We have had a lack of planners. We have an under-resourced planning board and under-resourced in many ways local authorities when it comes to planners as well. That is changing, and I hope the new planning bill going through the Oireachtas at the moment will make a difference. So Cross City Link probably, in fact, it is actually 2 years in the planning system since we made the planning application, almost to the week to when the board granted it permission. It's too long. And it just creates uncertainty around everything. I think about the engineering profession now. The great thing is we've come through a decade of what I would call planning and designing. The next decade is going to be about delivery. So I can't think of a more exciting time to be coming into the engineering profession in terms of the opportunity to see things being delivered. I go back to what I was saying earlier about the responsibility I was given at such an early stage, because back in those days as well, Ireland was delivering things, be it the motorway network or whatever. So while the planning has been challenging, things like the Bus Connects program are coming through the planning system now, as is the DART program in Dublin, as is the Cross City Link project in Galway, similar projects in Cork. So we're fortunate to have a little bit of money in the back pocket at the moment as a country. As long as we don't overheat the economy entirely, I'd love us to get to that nirvana for the country, which is steady state spend on infrastructure.
Let's chat about sustainability a little bit more, because that is very much a key core of Arup. Do you have an example outside of Galway now, right, of a pioneering solution that has been developed by you guys?
Oh God, I could probably go to global examples, but
give me a global example. Yeah.
Well, I was probably going to go to Transport Infrastructure Ireland, who I see as an incredibly progressive organisation, not just in terms of their ability to GSD. Can I say get shit done? Is that possible in the podcast? But they're good. They're very good as a delivery organisation, and we spent quite a lot of time. It's been great. We've been afforded the opportunity to develop a sustainability plan with them, which they're now permeating down into every facet of the organisation. And for me and for engineers, and if you think about sustainability, you really need to think about how you're designing, the materials you're using, and you really need to think about the existential crisis, which is climate change. And what that does for engineers is that we need to think about adaptation, resilience when it comes to infrastructure, because, the way we design has completely changed. Those 1 in 1,000-year events when it comes to flooding, etc. Well, unfortunately, they're not 1 in 1,000-year events anymore, as we've seen again in Cork recently, and again Cork last year in particular got a really bad doing from flooding. So engineers are at the heart of all of that. It's interesting. We had a brief chat about something before we started recording. What I see in society right now is cost of living, etc., has moved the climate change down the priority when it comes to people's thinking. And I can understand that, right, in the context of there are more important things in people's day-to-day lives. But we as engineers are the people that really focus on society now and building communities and society for the future. So it really is our number one priority in everything we do. Has to be.
So when you're thinking about that as a priority, how can the design of sustainable infrastructure help us through all of this? When you're thinking big and you're thinking long term.
I've always had an approach of thinking about design in terms of people. Of course, it sounds like a no-brainer, but you can't just be interested in the rail track and the choo-choo trains. You actually have to think about the communities you're serving. And if I think about transport, it's always been about access to opportunity. So in a world of consumption right now, we all need to realize the future really is about degrowth to a large extent, not necessarily growth, okay? Because we can't keep consuming. So when we start, for example, we've been doing an awful lot of work across the national, I'm going to say road program to start off. But we've taken an approach, as indeed has our colleagues within the industry, of actually starting with, well, why do we need to build a road? So there are very few of our national road projects that have remained road projects. They have all transformed into transport projects and thinking more about the communities we're serving and thinking about active travel, walking, cycling and public transport, and then what role, if any, the road has in that context.
We had a really interesting experience recently because we're not living in Dublin, but we took a trip to Paris. So big city, all right. We arrived and we literally just missed a metro. And we'll wait for the next one. And no sooner had the train left the station when another one came in. And the pair of us are going, that can't be us. They were literally every minute or every 2 minutes. And you're right when you think about sustainable and structure and, kind of using shared resources across the country. But everybody still wants, as you say, close to home. We want to walk out the door. We want to walk down to the bus stop or train station, and we want the train to be there in the next 5 minutes. Now, maybe in a city you can do that. And so much of Irish life is concentrated around Dublin because it's by far the biggest city. How do you see the infrastructure and the transport infrastructure for the rest of the country? Is it possible to bring in that kind of frequency, do you think?
Oh, that's a big question, Dusty. And actually, one of the things I'm very passionate about is rural Ireland and sustainable rural Ireland. And we're doing some work with the department at the moment on the National Demand Management Strategy, and we're doing a much more focused scheme with the National Transport Authority at the moment, a demand management strategy for the Greater Dublin area. So there will be societal changes in terms of how people think about their lives and how they move around, including not moving around all of the time. You could only, you mentioned Paris and Metro, which is a wonderful system. I've been on it several times. But, Paris has a density that
absolutely, yeah.
It's huge. And Dublin isn't a high density city either. It's becoming more dense. So you have to tailor your transport solution to the demographic and to density. So in rural Ireland, it is incredibly difficult to actually deliver mass transit. But one of the unsung heroes of this country, I think, is the local link bus service in rural Ireland. And I've a mother who lives in Donegal, and for the last 10 years, the local link service has been her lifeline, just in terms of connecting into the local town. And that's the case for so many people living in rural Ireland. The move to decarbonise the private car fleet, i.e. electric vehicles, there's no point in replacing all of the cars in Dublin that are petrol and diesel with electric cars, because you're still going to just end up with congestion. Where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to the impact on climate change that decarbonisation of the private car fleet that it can have, it is in rural Ireland, actually. Because, I like I said, having grown up in Donegal, I understand the need of a car when you live in rural Ireland. But actually, as we get over range anxiety and we actually deliver the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, and Arup is in the middle of supporting the department and TII on the rollout of the ZEVI program, which is the delivery of the charging infrastructure across the country. As all of that comes into being over the next 5 or 6 years, you're going to see, I think, a change in people's approach and attitude to electric vehicles. There needs to be a little bit of support from the government in terms of subsidisation as well. They are costly at the moment, but that's changing.
We are getting public support, and particularly when it gets to electric cars, but a lot of those subsidies are kind of dying off now at this stage. And it hasn't been like there's been a rush for people to go out and buy electric cars. A lot of people are getting kind of hybrid cars, but I don't know if they're any good. Anytime I speak to a taxi driver who's going hybrid, it's not worth it. But do you think electric cars, I think there is a goal, it's 2030 or 2035, where they want to have all petrol cars and diesel cars banned from sale, and the only thing you will be able to buy is an electric car. Do you think we will have hit that kind of key point where everybody just goes, sure, cars are electric, I'll just get one?
The biggest transformer of people's attitudes a lot of the time is regulation, right? Yeah, absolutely. And when you have industry and you give certainty to industry in terms of what the regulation is going to be, that's when you see a shift. Yeah, it's really interesting. If you look at what's going on globally, God, how do we get to here? But if you look at what's going on globally at the moment, there's America are putting tariffs on China, and the EU is extremely fearful of China. But actually, you have to pay attention to what's happening in China. The concern is that there's a lot of government subsidy for what they're doing in China, but the Chinese EV market has exploded, and they can actually flood the entire globe with their manufacturing capability. So the problem we have in Europe is that we have really old car companies that are very, very concerned about their future, and they have a big part to play in the European economy. You set that aside, if we are really serious about what we need to do, the means is there to allow us to do it.
Isn't it funny? It's like you say, engineering is all a human business because the solutions are there with electric vehicles, but it's the humans who are creating the problems. It's just funny how it goes. Let's get on to leadership and management, because you started off as a civil engineer and now you're in management. How does that, I mean, how did you get from A to B? Because management is a completely different thing to actually get hands-on engineering.
Yeah, it is. One of the things I really do suffer from is project envy. I sometimes struggle with my lack of time to be able to work on projects. But I actually comfort myself by all the great stuff that the team and Arup is doing in Ireland at the moment. So that's where I get my satisfaction, along with developing others coming through. Probably a little bit of timing, I'd say. Just when I come back from the UK, the Irish economy had taken off, and it's a bit like what we're going to see. Like I said, the next 10 years is really exciting to be in engineering, in my view. So I was afforded opportunity, and I grabbed it really young. I was afforded the opportunity through that gas pipeline project and others to have exposure to clients very, very quickly in my career. I built a network. It's not about networking, it's building a network. And, it's a small industry. So once you get to know the industry, you rely on that network quite a lot. So that allowed me to timing, in the sense that things were going really well in the early noughties in particular. I was afforded the opportunity to manage teams. I think I took over as head of transport planning in Arup. When did I do that? It was probably in early 2001, and I actually became a director in Arup. I was actually quite young. I was still 34 when I was made a director in Arup. God only knows what they were doing, but I was 34, so I was made a director in 2006, and then I've held different roles since. I moved on from being head of transport planning to leading our overall consultancy service in Ireland from 2013. And then we split into two operational groups in Ireland in 2018, and I became group leader for one of the two groups. And that's a team I have of about 400 people, and I've been there since.
A lot of those opportunities presented themselves to you, and you just kind of, yeah, okay, I'll lead that team, or I'll go up and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, is it a case of you were able to just grab those opportunities and learn from experience? Or did you have to do, kind of a certain amount of studying or, kind of extra education in order to make you a leader of people?
No, I would life experience. I think more than anything in particular. I'm doing a really interesting leadership course at the moment globally, and it's with cross-sectoral leadership. I've been over and back to the UK. I find that really fascinating because I've been on a course with NGOs. I've been on a course with people like the AA in the UK, etc. And it's been really interesting to learn from leaders in other sectors, to realize that a lot of the challenges we have are actually the same, and to be able to get different perspectives. So perspectives are really, really important, I think, in leadership, to actually, lean in on people in your network to get perspectives on things. I think in today's world, it's always been the case, but I think good leaders need to have empathy. You actually need to be personable. You actually need to understand what's going on, not just technically, but what's going on in terms of dynamic. And of course, we have lots of different dynamics now within teams because the generations are quite different, and the expectations and needs are very different cross-generationally within an organization. So it's a melting pot in that regard of things that you have to think about all of the time.
If you're looking at a new generation coming up, what advice would you have for one of those engineers who's looking to pursue a similar path to yourself?
Right.
Don't do it.
Most definitely do it. Most definitely pursue a career in engineering. Don't run before you can walk. Be content. Contentment is a word I use sometimes. I see an impatience now all of the time, and I think people need to be content and learn your trade. I think that's really, really important, and seize the opportunities. The future is theirs, not ours, and we're all working towards that.
All right, let's wrap up kind of looking at the future just a little bit. How do you see engineering evolving over the next 10 years? Is it all going to be delivery, or will we have more exciting new ideas that will go through the planning process?
So we pose ourselves a question, right? When I think about the future, I think about digital transformation in particular. So we pose ourselves a question as to whether we will be the designers of the built environment of the futures, or the designers of the AI that designs the built environment in the future. And the latter is kind of scary, and not quite sure that's quite right either, just in terms of my thoughts around, that we're still a people-centric business. But the rate of change when it comes to digital innovation is scary. AI is scary in the sense of how quickly it is actually being has taken off, and I don't mean the big language models like Chat GPT. It's more about the ability to do the things that we can do with data. And if you see if you think about another branch of engineering, if you see what's happening in the medical space just right now as a result of AI and the ability to actually predict disease or predict issues from the lake of information, if you have the lake of information. And I think the same applies to the design process when it comes to infrastructure or buildings as well. So that is something we're actually thinking about really, really deeply in Arup at the moment, just in terms of how we utilize data and digital to develop better design solutions and to allow us more time to be creative and think.
Do you think AI is going to help with digital twins?
Oh, very much so. I mean, digital twins have been around for a long time, but like everything else, AI, particularly in the last year, because it's been more like AI has been around for a long time in terms of what it is, but it's really come out into the public psyche in the last year. I think it's more because of the language models, but actually the computational power behind it is phenomenal.
Yeah. Are you using any of it at all in your own day-to-day work at the moment? Are you just, dipping your toe in the water, I should say?
I'd say we're trying to jump in as quickly as we can. We've dipped our toe and we're trying to jump in. Yeah.
What about new materials? Are there new materials coming along the line that you're keeping your eye on?
All at a time. I think the industry is thinking hard about some of the nutty challenges, and funnily enough, as we move away from oil, the oil industry is still focused on things like polymers and things like that, so they're hanging on. But we've been developing expertise in particular in timber design in Arup, I think, as a renewable material source. So engineers all of the time need to be thinking about the materials, and the embodied carbon that goes into actually building anything is so important.
Well, Donal, I'm going to leave it there for now. It's been absolutely fascinating chatting with you. If you'd like to find out more about Donal and some of the topics that we did chat about on the podcast today, you'll find notes and link details in the description area of this podcast. But for now, Donal McDaid of Arup, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dusty. Pleasure.
If you enjoyed our podcast today, please do share with a friend in the business. Just tell them to search for Engineers Ireland in their podcast player. The podcast is produced by dustpod.io for Engineers Ireland. For advanced episodes, more information on engineering in Ireland or career development opportunities, there are libraries of information on our website at engineersireland.ie. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, thank you for listening.